You are listening to Viewpoints from PlaceCloud. Cultural researchers tell stories of places from around the world. For the full multimedia experience and to support the creators you enjoy, visit placecloud.io.
We're at the Pelourinho in Cidade Velha, in the south of the island of Santiago, in Cape Verde. The historic center of Cidade Velha is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The town of Ribeira Grande, renamed Cidade Velha, Old Town, in the late 18th century, was the first European colonial outpost in the tropics. The town features some of the original street layout and impressive remains, including two churches, a royal fortress, and this Pillory Square, with its ornate 16th century marble pillar. A pillory, often a pillar here of marble, was used during the medieval and Renaissance periods for punishment by public humiliation and often further physical abuse, typically used to punish slaves. Cape Verde has a long Portuguese colonial history, but also played a role in Dutch history during the period the north of Brazil was under Dutch control. One episode in which the Dutch played a part was when, in the summer of 1643, a Dutch ship quietly left the Brazilian port of Recife under murky authorization. Its destination, Cape Verde, the string of volcanic islands off the coast of West Africa. Though long claimed by the Portuguese, Cape Verde had become one of the busiest and most brutal waypoints in the transatlantic slave trade. But this voyage was not part of any official West India Company expedition, the private company controlling the Dutch colony in Brazil. It was an illegal venture, one that would pierce the carefully constructed image of John Maurice of Nassau, governor of Dutch Brazil, and reveal the entangled interests between personal profit, colonial control, and human bondage. At the center of this clandestine operation stood Gaspar Dias Ferreira, a close associate of Nassau. Acting with unspoken approval, Dias secured a vessel named Demon, refitted it in haste, and dispatched it to Cape Verde. The plan? To bypass the West India Company's monopoly and directly acquire enslaved Africans and inanimate goods. The cargo was to return not just as contraband, but as a political tool offered selectively to allies in Brazil to buy loyalty and reinforce the Nassau regime. What unfolded was a colonial scandal cloaked in silence. Cape Verde had long been a strategic fulcrum of Atlantic slavery. Enslaved people from the mainland were held, sold, and redirected from the archipelago to Portuguese colonies in the Americas. For the Dutch, controlling the supply of enslaved Africans from Angola and the broader West African coast was vital to maintaining the sugar economy of Brazil. But the Dutch West India Company had strictly forbidden trade with Cape Verde, especially by private individuals. The risk of provoking Portugal and undermining the company's monopoly was just too great. Yet, Gaspar Dias went anyway. His motivations were clear: fast profit, political leverage, and the opportunity to elevate his own status within the shifting elite society of Dutch Brazil. The voyage succeeded. Dozens of enslaved Africans arrived in Mauritsstad and were either sold or gifted to sugar planters and officials close to Nassau. These weren't altruistic donations, they were carefully timed offerings with delayed payment demands, giving the governor a kind of economic leash on his allies. Dias and his circle attempted to cover their tracks. The enslaved people were hidden on plantations, mixed in with other arrivals, and falsely recorded as coming from Bahia. But there were cracks in the cover-up. Some of the enslaved individuals openly declared they had come from Cape Verde. Others were physically marked, their identities and origins impossible to erase. The directors of the West India Company learned of the smuggling, but chose not to make the matter public. Official investigations were delayed or softened, and Nassau was never formally accused. Still, the episode added to the growing strain between the governor and the company's leadership, who had already rejected his vision of integrating Angola and Brazil into a unified colonial structure. They feared that combining the source of enslaved labor, Africa, with its destination, Brazil, under one command would give Nassau too much power, and this smuggling operation confirmed their worst suspicions. Nassau has often been remembered as the Humanist prince, a patron of science, tolerance, and art in the New World. His court in Recife welcomed naturalists and painters, and his governance was long celebrated for its moderation. But the story of the Cape Verde expedition and others like it paints a more conflicted picture. He presided over, profited from, and politically weaponized slavery. The Cape Verde connection reveals that even his most generous gestures were often rooted in coercion, backed by financial schemes and tied to a broader architecture of domination. Far from an aberration, Cape Verde was a hidden artery in the Dutch colonial body, forbidden yet pulsing with profit, disavowed yet indispensable. Cape Verde is not just a geographical footnote in the story of Dutch Brazil, it is a lens through which we can see the informal mechanisms of empire, the slippage between official policy and private ambition, and the ways in which even the most enlightened rulers were complicit in the machinery of slavery. In the shadows of the sugar mills and behind the facades of princely courts, ships like the Demon tell a deeper truth, that colonial power often sailed under false flags. After the expulsion of the Dutch from Brazil, Cape Verde remained part of the Portuguese colonial empire until 1975, finally gaining independence after the Carnation Revolution of 1974, the military coup in Portugal which resulted in Portugal's colonial empire finally falling apart. The old center of Cidade Velha became a World Heritage Site in 2009.